If you don't know me, my name is Asif. I'm also on the board as a lay member for the Children's Safeguarding Children's Board. I'm supporting from Matt, who's going to be doing the introductions before Sheikh Sulman is going to just do the recitation of the Quran, and then we'll introduce the others. Yeah? So Sheikh Sulman, if you can come and start.
Sorry, thank you.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تلهكم أموالكم ولا أولادكم عن ذكر الله ومن يفعل ذلك فأولئك هم الخاسرون وأنفقوا مما رزقناكم من قبل أن يأتي أحدكم الموت فيقول ربي لولا أخرتني إلى أجل قريب فأصدق وأكن من الصالحين ولن يؤخر الله نفسا إذا جاء أجلها والله خبير بما تعملون.
Yes. Thank you. My name is Ashaq Kareem, as Badru asked to say. I'm the Secretary for Muslim Association of Croydon. First of all, many apologies for the late notice for this meeting. We did try to get this notice out early during the week, but we had some, let's say, issues or problems with hiring a home, which we'll be sorting out later on. I'm glad that you're here today, because this is a very important issue that we are about to hear about and to discuss. This is something that has really gone past us as a community without us having any input into it. We've basically sleepwalked into this thing without knowing exactly what it is and the consequences for not only our community but other communities and faiths as well. So today we have three speakers here. We have Sheikh Sulman Ghani, who most of you know. We have Asim Qureshi, who's from Cage. And is it Shiplumia from Mend. So without wasting any further time, let's just kick off with Sheikh. Do you want to say something else?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. All praise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has given us the courage, the tawfiq, the ability to come here. And really speaking, we as a community and people who follow our faith are really concerned about our identity as Muslims. So we are coming here to listen from the experts, in fact. And what is really said is that there are many great important personalities here whom may not be fully aware of what is going to be the consequence when this becomes legislation. So first, in order for us to do any actions, we have to first listen, educate ourselves, and see how it's going to have an impact on our lives, on our families, on our children. Because at the end of it, we understand, and this is how serious the matter is. The Quran is the book that has never changed. When we just ponder and read Surah Al-Buruj, there is one verse where Allah Ta'ala reminds the believers that the only reason they hated you, وَمَا نَقَمُوا مِنْهُمْ إِلَّا أَن يُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَمِيدِ, for the simple reason that they had brought Iman in Al-Aziz Al-Hamid. So it is not about how do you look. There are Muslims who have beards, no have beards. There are Muslim women who have hijab, niqab. There are those who don't. But the point is, it is not far-fetched. It's not something that we should just brush it under the carpet. People have witnessed here in Europe what has happened in Bosnia. We don't like to bring those examples, but that is the reality. There were people who were not even practicing Islam. They had not had Islam in their lives. But see the condition, how the condition of the people changed. The only reason they were persecuted and Muslims were butchered, slaughtered, is they had Iman. They only knew that they are Muslim. So this is the worry. We see the whole tide is changing in Europe. And what is happening in other parts of the world, the way the media is portraying even what's happening in Syria and all those places, really, we don't want to go into all of the conspiracies and all of that, but how the media is portraying it, it's going to increase in Islamophobia. Our main issue is, let's first listen, benefit from Brother Asim Qureshi, who is from Cage, and he is an expert in his field. He has many case studies. He knows about families who are already affected, even though it's not legislation. And at the same time, we have Brother Shiplu, who is from the organization MEN. He will also give us little details, technicalities, what is this bill about, how it's going to impact on our life. And at the end of it, as Muslims, we know our religion is very clear. We need to peacefully coexist. Islam teaches tolerance. Islam teaches that you respect other faiths. Islam teaches that you do not swear at other people's gods, their beliefs. Otherwise, they will swear at your God, they will curse your Creator without knowledge. وَلَا تَصُبُّ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَيَصُبُّ اللَّهَ عَدْوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. So it is not about trying, we don't want to be alienated, we don't want to be marginalized. We want to be and live in the community and continue to live as peaceful citizens, abiding by the law, but we don't want to live in a state where we are all the time under fear. I don't want to take much time, and inshallah later on we'll come back in. And indeed, I know it was short notice, and I'm also grateful to Brother Asif, who at very short notice, and also Muslim Association of Croydon to help and put this event together. And we hope this is only the beginning, and we hope that there will be a follow-up on this meeting. Inshallah, we request Brother Asim if he can give us more details, and especially concentrate on some of the real life case studies, what is really happening on the ground right now. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair. Please forgive me if I remain seated while I speak. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. So, my name is Asim Qureshi. As the Sheikh mentioned, I come from the organization CAGE. For the last 12, 13 years, my work has involved traveling around the world, investigating human rights abuses with what we conceptually refer to as the war on terror. My work started off representing or working with individuals who were detained without charge or trial in Guantanamo Bay, places like Abu Ghraib, other secret prisons around the world. I did a lot of work in Pakistan where thousands of people have been picked up and placed into programs of enforced disappearances, and many of them still are missing to this very day, kind of trying to investigate torture centers around the world. And also a large part of that is holding our own government to account for its role in being involved in a program of rendition and torture. So famously, we were involved in bringing a case against the government where we hold the government to account for its role in the rendition and torture of British citizens who had been sent to Guantanamo Bay. Now, while all of that kind of appears as the sharp end of what we would refer to as counter-terrorism policy, there is a widespread low-level form of counter-terrorism policy that affects Muslim communities and other communities as well, because while this legislation may start off impacting on Muslims, it inevitably ends up affecting animal rights protesters, bankers, through extradition warrants, and many other people as well. So it starts off with terrorism, ends up affecting other communities. But there's this low level of counter-terrorism policy and legislation that ends up taking away the human rights of people on a regular basis. And we have to understand where this stuff comes from conceptually first in order to understand where we are right now. So after the 7/7 bombings, Tony Blair famously said that the rules of the game have changed. And what that meant was that they would have to put aside, the government chose to put aside the rule of law for the sake of protecting this country's national security. So rather than taking a rights-based approach to maintaining the culture and the identity and the integrity of the British legal system, that they would in fact have to, in some ways, bring in new legislation which might not necessarily marry up with traditional British common law values. And the hallmarks of that we still see today are secret evidence being used in British courts. Just last year, for the very first time, we had secret evidence being used in a trial, in a criminal trial. For a decade now, it's been used in civil law cases, so deportation cases, what are known as control order cases, which is a form of house arrest, as well as various forms of exclusion orders. But the government basically in those civil cases would say, this is a matter of national security, we can't allow the appellant or the defendant to see the evidence against them because it's a matter of national security, and so they have to be excluded from the court while we present our evidence to the judge. For those of us from a human rights background, from a legal background, especially within the NGO community, this scenario was completely anomalous to how we understand British values and the British legal system. So also in 2007, the government came up with a program with a policy. It was called the Prevent Strategy. And the Prevent Strategy's initial goal was to prevent what it called violent extremism. So they came up with a narrative about how violence works, how political violence or terrorism works, which was there is a radicalization process that takes place that involves online materials, that involves scholars, it involves literature, where individuals almost self-radicalize themselves or become radicalized by external forces, and those individuals then go on to committing acts of violence in the UK or abroad. So this was the theory that they came up with. They called it, and they still call it today, the conveyor belt theory, that you go through certain stages and eventually become a suicide bomber. And this was promoted by certain Muslim groups that were very, very closely funded by the government, such as the Quilliam Foundation and others. And this theory basically took root. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, the actual, the integrity of that theory as a construct. But this is where they started from. So they took that as their starting point, and then from then onwards said, okay, fine, we need to come up with a strategy now that deals with that. So the Prevent Strategy was implemented, and funding was given to lots of different Muslim groups around the country. You know, they basically tried to throw money at this situation. They funded so many different groups. A lot of those groups just took the money and pocketed it and said, well, you know, we can just kind of do our social welfare projects and we can do this project and that project, until the government eventually figured out, oh, this actually isn't going the way that we had hoped, or it's not producing the results that we had hoped for. So when the next parliamentary election took place and the Conservatives and the Lib Dems came into coalition with one another, they came in on a mandate that Prevent had failed and that they would have to revise the strategy completely. So in 2011, they came up with the new Prevent Strategy, the revised Prevent Strategy. And the soundings that we were hearing just before it were that, well, the old one failed, so they've obviously learned their lessons and they're going to come up with a new one that actually is interested in dealing with the root causes of political violence or the root causes of the frustrations that our community feels within the UK. Unfortunately, they went in the opposite direction. What was draconian before became even more draconian after, as they went from saying that we have to deal with the problem of violent extremism to the problem of extremism itself. So they defined extremism within this Prevent Strategy, and they said extremism is vocal or active opposition to democracy, British values, speaking out or being condemnatory of the British Armed Forces. I mean, very, very wide and vague terms. Under this definition, you could consider Russell Brand, kind of the archetypal anti-democracy campaigner or celebrity as being extremist. And many other examples as well. Because the terms are so wide and they're so vague that really you can't specifically highlight, okay, this is exactly what they mean when they're talking about what an extremist is. So they made the whole thing ideological. They made it about what's inside our head, what's inside our hearts. What is it that you believe in? Because according to the government, that's what makes you an extremist, and ultimately it's that belief system, according to the government strategy, that then allows for you to then become somebody who's violent. Okay, and this is of course something that we would take great issue with as people of faith, as people who practice their religion, that somehow our faith has almost become a marker, an indicator, or our religiosity has become an indicator of potential extremism. And it's very much in that area that we find ourselves right now. So Shibli is going to talk about the details of the counter-terrorism and security bill, but I want to start by asking you all to imagine a world in which this bill already exists. Imagine it's become law. So I want you to imagine a case of, say for example, a taxi driver. He's got a big beard, he wears a turban, drives around London in his cab, and he's got one of those Qur'ans in his rear view mirror, dangles around, as he drives. Every time he takes a left, it dangles right, and every time he takes a right, it dangles left, sitting there waving around all the time. He's got his hands-free kit on as well in the car because he likes to talk to people while he's there, and he speaks in Arabic. So you've got somebody sitting as a passenger in the back who, might get a little bit scared about the fact that this guy's speaking in Arabic. He's got this dangly thing, that's waving around. It looks very quite intimidating, and his turban looks intimidating as well. So they report him to the police. The police come and arrest the guy, maybe, and they can't find anything on him. So what they do, they go to the local council instead, who issues the taxi licenses, and the council remove his license because they're worried, because it's a safeguarding issue. We don't want to put people at risk of being in a car with this guy, because maybe he's trying to radicalize them, maybe they're at risk of being in a car with him, maybe he's going to do something dangerous later. Because the whole way the CTS bill is presented is as a safeguarding issue. Or let's take another example. Maybe you've got a couple who suffer from autism, maybe a form of Asperger's, so they find certain environments very, very difficult to be in. They're in a situation one day, say for example in a bank, where they're not able to communicate with the bank teller who doesn't understand their learning difficulties. So they get into a heated argument as they're not able to understand one another. Police get called in, they get arrested, and rather than being dealt with as people who have mental health problems and or learning difficulties who need help, they get reported to prevent officers who then kind of go into their home, start questioning them about their ideology, their belief, report them to counter-terrorism officers who then put them through a whole process of scrutiny, which, for people who have Asperger's, it's very, very damaging to them. It's damaging to their ability to exist in the world, because they like routine. They like to know that the world exists in a certain way, and they're being subjected to an environment that is completely alien to them. So the two examples that I've given just now are not hypotheticals. These two cases are two cases that I'm working on right now, before the CTS bill has even come into being. This is how the prevent strategy works currently. So I just wanted to kind of put it into your mind that this counter-terrorism and security bill is trying to make statute what already is taking place. That's how serious this is. The taxi driver is a case that I'm working on right now. This poor man is having his life ripped apart simply because somebody was scared about the way that he looked. It is that simple. I've dealt with hundreds of cases. Right now on my roster, just from the prevent stuff that I'm dealing with, I've got 32 cases, with literally every single day more and more cases coming to me. Because people are being reported by their colleagues. I dealt with one case of, once again under prevent, where a woman, she had some health issues, a Muslim woman. She wasn't particularly practicing. She had health issues, she had to take a year off work. This was in a hospital, she was working as admin in the hospital. So during that year off, she reflects on her life, she finds religion, she starts practicing her faith. She then starts to wear the hijab, ultimately she wears the niqab as well, the face covering as well. And when she returns back to work after her time off, her colleagues are surprised by this change, as they would be. But instead of asking her about why she had chosen to take this path in life, why she had chosen to make these decisions, they immediately reported her to prevent officers, because every single hospital and every single GP practice now has to have a prevent lead. So they immediately reported her saying that we're worried that she has become radicalized and is at risk of becoming an extremist or a terrorist. So this young woman was one day just working, doing her normal admin duties, And Prevent officers come in to the building, they come in directly to her desk, and in front of all of the patients and the staff, they start asking her about what? Not about whether or not she's a danger to society. What is your opinion on Islam? What is your opinion on the Middle East? About what's happening in Israel and Palestine? What's your opinion on X, Y, and Z? So they start interrogating her about her belief system and her political beliefs as well, and her political opinions. And this is in front of everyone, openly. So after that, her colleagues become even more suspicious of her. The next time she has a review, as part of her normal reviews that she has in her hospital, and she goes into this review thinking she's about to get a promotion actually, because she's been doing very well at her job. Prevent officers are sitting in that review with her colleagues. I understand that people are scared because of the way that media presents Muslims, and they present the whole idea of terrorism and the way that Muslims are and the way that we behave and so on and so forth. But this legislation, these policies, they engender an environment which breeds fear, it breeds mistrust, and it breeds hate. So we are now at risk of being not only reported on by our colleagues, but being reported on by our GPs, by our teachers, our university lecturers, and the new legislation, which we'll talk about again, specifically highlights childminders. That childminders are under a duty, under Part 5 of this bill, to report those children under their care that are at risk of being drawn into terrorism. I'm not joking, I'm not making any of this up. This is all within the draft legislation. This is what is about to become law, which is why it's so important that we pay attention to it. So there is this nexus between the way in which all of these policies in this legislation work. By the way, the legislation itself doesn't define anything. It just talks about the need to stop people from being drawn into terrorism. But it doesn't say how. All is left is that it says that the Home Secretary will issue guidance as to the way in which you are to stop these people. So it's still an arbitrary decision from the Home Secretary. There is no defining of anything. There's no debates within Parliament about the way in which people should be stopped from being drawn into terrorism. It's just simply allowing for Prevent to take a statutory basis without any real scrutiny whatsoever. Because up until now, no one has told me what British values actually are. I consider myself extremely British. You know, I went to school not far from here, to Whitgift School. I went to some of the best universities in the country. You know, I got my master's in law from 3 of the best universities in the country, 3 of the red bricks that we have. I consider myself, I always laugh about this. If you put me on an island anywhere in the world, I would still be as sarcastic in my kind of British style as I would sitting right here. You can't remove that from me. I was born and raised here. It's an intrinsic part of who I am. What I laugh about most, and my family laugh at me about this all the time as well, that whenever I travel to Lahore airport, I get there and loads of flights are landing at the same time. You're trying to find a queue. There's no concept of a queue for anybody who's ever been there.